Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics Podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media to see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the Baskin to my Robbins, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
Today we are talking about the Hutts.
So when we say Hutt, we are talking about the species to which Jabba the Hutt is the most famous member from the Star Wars universe. It was when that movie came out, and for a large portion of my childhood, it was unclear as to what exactly Hutt meant. It sounded like a title to me, but apparently it's his species name.
So he was basically the same as calling someone, Jabba the human, or...
Yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate. But yeah, so apparently we're talking about Jabba's species, the Hutts. There's not a whole lot in the original canon. I know that they're expanded on a bit in the Clone Wars series and maybe in Rebels too, which I haven't seen yet. So we're going to go basically just by Jabba. That's it. We're just going to go by Jabba. Okay.
Okay.
All right. We'll start with, and maybe, we're going to pull one piece of information from the Wikipedia about him, which is that apparently they have 3 lungs, which I love, because that implies, as you suggested, they have trilateral symmetry.
Yeah.
That would be really cool.
I think that's something to look into. Just why stop at just 3 lungs? Why not?
Yeah. 3 everything.
Yeah.
So if by some miracle you've never seen Star Wars, Jabba the Hutt is a fearsome gangster who appears, for most people's watching, will appear first in Return of the Jedi as the head of organized crime on Tatooine, and his appearance is one of a giant slug creature with arms, maybe about 15 feet long, something like that, with a huge frog-like mouth and big old eyes and stubby little arms. And he doesn't look all that physically imposing, but his the power of his criminal organization is great. And then he's sort of the first act villain for that movie, and then is delightfully spoiler warning, I guess, delightfully killed off at the end of that first act before they move on into bigger and better things.
I think the thing that bothers me the most about the whole gangster organization is he's a part of the Hutt clan, which is supposed to be a criminal organization, but it's like, I'm part of the human clan.
Yeah. The Hutts definitely suffer a little bit from, because their first iteration, the first example of them that we see is a particular character. Now everybody thinks that all Hutts are exactly like that character. They're all criminal gangster lords and stuff like that, which precludes the idea of, Hutt Jedi or Hutt mechanics or pilots and things like that.
Oh God, don't put that into existence.
Hutt pole dancers, things like that. So we were discussing this a little bit before, because the origin of us doing this episode is that some random person tweeted at us that what were we going to be doing for May the 4th, which is Star Wars Day. And I jokingly responded, what could we do? Improve Hutts. And then you and I started talking about it, and we started coming up with ideas for improving Hutts. And
yeah.
So that's the goal, is to turn Hutts into something that makes a bit of sense and something that will be maybe imposing and cool and that you could actually expand on.
Or if things go the way they usually do, at least something horrifically awful.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure we can get both. We're not going to do a hive mind this time, though. So my initial thought looking at this giant slug creature was, that is a monster that came from water. We are seeing that something that has been beached and that is outside of its element. And then maybe Jabba is, because he's a godfather of a giant crime organization, he might be kind of less athletic than other examples of his species. Like, he may not be the most perfect example of a Hutt, that they might otherwise be a little bit less corpulent and a little bit more physically threatening themselves. But you can sort of imagine the homeworld they might be from, or at least their particular biome within that homeworld might be much more aquatic, and sort of the image I have in my head is stagnant water but very deep. So like you have these like plants coming up out of the water, and this just murky, like, there is no visibility because of all the mud and silt that's in the water, and there are these places where they could hide, and like those catfish, they could like lower themselves to the bottom and like cover themselves in sediment. And when something swims by, they just come out of nowhere and like swallow it in one big gulp.
Okay, that's kind of terrifying.
I think that'd be cool. And I think one of the tidbits on the Wikipedia is that Jabba has 3 lungs. And so I think trilateral symmetry would be really cool. Make him look kind of like
I'm picturing almost like a sandworm.
Yeah, sandworm or a graboid from Tremors.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where they've got this sort of slimy, slinky body that can move them through sediment and mud and stuff really well. And then they've got like a jaw that opens up into 3 parts.
I want them to keep like the arms, but add in like a third arm.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Like instead of like 2 coming out the side, you have like 1, 60 degrees off from each of the others. That'd be pretty cool. And then those arms are really there for like grabbing onto roots and rocks and things underneath the water, so that they can sort of hold themselves in place. It's not really like those aren't for locomotion. It's just for like sort of grasp, like setting themselves into a location.
Something you, I think, had mentioned when we were talking about this earlier was having like their movement be kind of like a leech.
Yeah.
Where it kind of contracts and expands forward.
Yeah, where their whole body is kind of boneless, and so they can kind of move in and out and like stretch themselves out to be long and thin, and then also like bunch up to be big and like fat, like a fat snake.
Oh, I hate it.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And I don't think, it's been a little while since I've watched Return of the Jedi. I don't think Jabba has teeth. Like I don't remember seeing teeth in that mouth.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Let me do a quick image search on Jabba the Hutt, and the only thing I can remember is when he grabs that little thing and shoves it in his mouth hole, which just makes me think that that's how he eats, right? Yeah, as far as I can tell, that puppet does not have teeth.
Just whatever you do, don't Google Jabba the Hutt's teeth. It pulls up some very disturbing images.
No, I want to see. It's exactly my jam. Yeah, those are pretty bad.
I regret that.
I like the one with him with braces, actually. So like frogs don't have teeth. Frogs pretty much only ever like swallow things whole. So that's kind of what I'm thinking for Hutts, is that they just have maybe like a bone ridge or something in there that really is only about grasping onto something to keep it from coming back out. It's not about like shredding it.
So are we still keeping like that that trilateral jaw kind of setup?
I'm kind of, I think I definitely think a trilateral jaw is the way to go. And then maybe, I don't know, do we want to keep those big eyes? The eyes of Jabba they're kind of an important feature to him, to me.
Yeah.
He's got that kind of frog-like appearance. But do we want to maybe...
It looks very sleepy in all the films and whatnot.
Well, he's very lazy. Like he takes a nap in the middle of the day in one of the movie. Maybe that's just Jabba himself. Like he can afford to do that. Maybe they have... Do we want to give them eye stalks? Like they've got 3 around in the same sort of configuration as their arms, and they're little like mover things.
I feel like going like with eye stalks would at least give you, because I always picture like when we go like the trilateral symmetry or the Dune thing, like you kind of lose that sense of personality.
Yeah.
When you can't like look something in the eyes, when you can only look at one eye at the same time.
Yeah, this is a non-humanoid alien. I think that losing some of that personhood is good. I think it makes him seem more of an other. Little, because you can imagine him or one of his species, like I was talking about, like pushing themselves down into the sediment and then just having that one little eye stalk up at the top, moving around and looking. And then, so let's see, would they be completely amphibious? Because obviously Jabba can survive up in air, so he can breathe air. He doesn't require a respirator or anything like that. So he at least has as much of an amphibious nature as like a mud skipper or something.
What I'm kind of picturing is like maybe like his stronghold or his lair or whatever you want to call it, like has just like a network of plumbing that he travels through.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Where in each of the rooms, there's a big pool for him to slide into, and then he essentially kind of flushes himself down the drain and then appears somewhere else.
Yeah, I like that.
That's cool. Yeah. So yeah, I think maybe like unlike frogs, which spend a portion of their life out on land, the Hutts they're all about water. They never have a stage of their life cycle where they're well suited to water, unless maybe they're reverse of frogs, where the adults are aquatic and maybe the juveniles are land based, because maybe on their planet the land isn't super dangerous. Like maybe all of the real dangers are underneath the water, and so when they're going to reproduce, they slither up on land and lay their eggs or have their live births or whatever it is that Hutts do, like on a beach somewhere, kind of like a turtle, like a sea turtle. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, I like that. I like the sea turtle analogy. That's kind of an interesting take.
Okay.
They basically just have to get their eggs out of the water for safety's sake, bury them, and then slither back into whatever filth they come from.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and they don't have primitive Hutts don't have a really strong family structure. Like they work like sea turtles. They dump a bunch of eggs on a beach somewhere, or they bury them in some sand, and then they bugger off and they never see them again. And the Hutts all sort of when they develop, they get bigger and they slide out into the water, and then they're all individual. In fact, this seems like a species that would be cannibalistic, like in their primitive form. Like they would just eat the small Hutts if they came across one.
Yeah.
Because that's a very frog thing to do, is like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna eat you.
It's smaller than me. I'm gonna eat it.
Yeah, exactly. Anything smaller than a Hutt is sufficiently.
It's food.
Yeah. I like the idea that also that like snakes, when they gorge themselves, if snakes eat something quite large, they actually can become vulnerable, because the amount of energy it takes to digest large amounts of food like slows them down and keeps them sedentary for a long time. And so that might explain something of Jabba's behavior, because he is very well fed all of the time, because he's a crime boss and he can just order out whatever he wants. And so he's this big sort of,
or whoever he wants.
Yeah, he's just this big sort of fat slug, and he doesn't really move around or anything that we see, is because he is very well fed all the time, and that actually slows down his metabolism. It makes it hard for him to move.
Interesting. I like that. It's a neat take on that.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got I think we've got a pretty good idea of what the primitive Hutt would have looked like. This sort of big slug creature with 3 arms and this big trilateral mouth with 3 jaws and eye stalks. What's the transition between this swamp creature that doesn't even have the control of fire or anything like that into the very intelligent spacefaring creatures that we see them in the movie? Like what's maybe the catalyst that gets them to move out of the water? Maybe they're I guess they're technically humans in Star Wars. Maybe they land on that planet and start colonizing it, and that's when they make contact with this primitive species. And the Hutts are sort of opportunistic in that way. Like they start meeting the humans and learning from them and start taking over. Like they adopt things from the human society and from the humans instead of like developing their own. Maybe.
Interesting. Like where they kind of cannibalize a human operation.
Yeah.
And sort of maybe it starts kind of like running things from the shadows.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe that they when the humans first show up, they meet the Hutts, and the Hutts are sort of interested in them, and maybe there's a few a couple of early meetings where people get eaten, and then they sort of start to figure each other out, and then the Hutts have, at least for a period of time, or have like a friendly relationship where they're doing jobs for the humans. You know, they're maybe they're hunting, or they're helping terraform, or they're helping install equipment underwater or something like that. But during that entire time, they're sort of laying in wait and learning everything they can about the humans, and then sort of kind of all at once they start turning on them and taking over and like eating the humans that are there and taking over their facilities and repurposing them for their own purposes, and sort of like in one fell swoop, what was once a sort of peaceful relationship turns on the humans, and there's like a brief war until it turns out that these things are huge and fearsome and will swallow you whole. And it turns out they're very smart because they're predators. They need to be smart. So they have learned everything they need to know to start like taking over these ships and refitting them and like repurposing the humans' equipment for stuff. Does that sound kind of cool?
It does. What would a spacefaring ship for a largely amphibious creature look like, I wonder?
I think that they would have like something that you see all the time on ships designed for humans is they have an up, you know, like they have a direction for which everybody can orient themselves. And I think that an aquatic species would be far less concerned with that they would, they'd make a ship that was sort of kind of just globular, like is kind of the thing I want to say. Like it's just these compartments all like welded together and not meant to.
I'm almost picturing like a 3-dimensional lattice of like tubes and chambers.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be really cool. And then maybe that would work well for their big ships, the ones that never have to land, because they could just sort of be these sort of one of the designs they used for all of the Mon Calamari ships in Star Wars is they're these big round lozenge shapes, and then they have all these little bulbous like things on them. But in that version, it looks very clean and well put together. Like they've whitewashed everything and made it all blend. It looks beautiful, kind of whale-like. And you can imagine that a Hutt ship, once they've start designing their own, would look kind of similar, but instead of being beautiful and sleek and glossy, would be kind of dark and muddy, and all of these little bulbous protrusions, instead of looking kind of graceful, would actually like stick out more, and you'd have kind of a like a boil-like quality for them. That could be pretty cool.
I've got a trypophobic response to this, and I can't even see it.
It's interesting because they would be as an aquatic species, or mostly aquatic species, they wouldn't be like, you wouldn't find them being mercenaries or anything in most places, because once they get on land, they're going to have a hard time. Like they can move around kind of like a mud skipper can move around on Earth, but like their natural habitat is underwater. So you might see them, like if they travel out, they might actually find other planets where like there isn't a sentient species lurking in the swamps, and they would sort of take over those niches. Or
I also kind of want to talk about the ecological impact of a creature that doesn't need to stay around to raise its young and can basically seed planets with its offspring.
Oh yeah, that is cool. Where they could just land, offload a bunch of eggs, and then leave. Oh, I love that as a sort of compulsion that they have to do. Like they feel like that's the right thing to do. Like they don't really like it might not even be like calculated. Like, okay, this is exactly what we're going to do, but more like the instinct is, I am full of eggs and I need to land somewhere so that I can get rid of them. To them, it might feel almost like taking a dump. Like they're like, I got to get rid of this stuff, man.
Interesting. Yeah. And I like the idea that maybe the Hutt Empire doesn't really have anything to do with like any interconnected feelings or collaboration between the Hutts. It's just like there are Hutts on almost every planet because they visit them, offload, and move on.
Yeah. And in that sense, like there'd be lots of different examples of them showing up on some planet and meeting the locals there and being taught the ways of those locals. And then they would, they would still have some connection with the other Hutts, but they might actually feel like they are more part of a local community from that too.
Oh yeah.
That could be kind of cool. They sort of ingratiate themselves is maybe the way to put it. Ow, this explains Jabba. Okay.
All right.
Jabba was left on Tatooine, right? Like he didn't grow up on Hutt, right? Like he didn't grow up on his homeworld. He was dumped on Tatooine with all of the other eggs of his clutch. And because Tatooine is a desert planet to which none of them are well associated, Jabba like was the only one to make it. So then calling him Jabba the Hutt makes sense because he's literally the only Hutt any of these people have ever seen.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
And then
that's a cool take on that.
Yeah, and he just happened to be smart enough and conniving enough and like probably worked his way up from like, oh man, okay. Literally probably the only place where there is enough water for a Hutt to get around and be effective is some sort of sewer system. That is probably where he got his start. Like he probably worked amongst the literal of Mos Eisley or something like that for a long time until he started to take over the crime syndicate of that area, and then like grew out. Once he got into a position where he could be management, then he moved himself out of the sewers and bought himself his first palace or whatnot. That could be cool. Yeah. Okay. I that makes Jabba cooler. Like that's cooler than what Jabba actually is.
Oh yeah.
That's fantastic.
What other aspects of Hutts can we look into?
I think we have to learn from Jabba, and from what we've also heard is they like to eat prey whole. Like they're not a chewing species, and they don't seem to be a cooking species. So like literally just like have to have stuff like probably for Jabba, he probably has to have seafood shipped in from like outer space in order to have his delicacies that he wants. And they just sort of like shove it in and like digest it. Okay, so going off of the like they are trilaterally symmetrical.
Can we back up just a moment
please.
Before we quit this? So the first thing we see, or one of the first things we see in Star Wars on Tatooine is a moisture farm.
Yeah. Okay.
What if that's like sort of like in service to Jabba the Hutt, or like he has all these moisture farms, like basically trying to terraform Tatooine in a localized area.
Yeah. Or even just gather up enough water to feed his palace. Like Luke and his aunt and uncle might literally have been like shipping off water every season to Jabba's palace for him to have a water park in. Like,
yeah, I'm like with him being kind of like a crime boss, I'm almost picturing sort of like a feudal setup where everyone's basically tithing a certain amount of their moisture
for sure
to Jabba.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's as far as I'm concerned, that's headcanon now. I like that. Hello, Editor Scott here. The next part of this episode contains a rather fast and loose discussion of Hutt reproduction. It's not particularly gross, but my illustrious co-host and myself are rather imprecise with our language. Specifically, we muddy up the waters between the social and cultural concept of gender with the biological concept of sex. If you can't stomach listening to that, I don't blame you in skipping the rest of this episode. But if you can forgive our word choice, continue on. Okay, so I was thinking, if they're trilaterally symmetrical, I just want to riff on the idea of like 3 being an important number for them. And I'm thinking about maybe like they have 3 genders, 3 sexes.
Okay.
Where either like one of the few things I can remember from extended universe canon of about Jabba is that apparently they're hermaphroditic.
Okay.
Which I'm not sure I'm super into. But I love the idea of them having some sort of weird 3 gender system where like they each have something to contribute. Like there's 3 different kinds of gametes or something. Although maybe that doesn't work so well if you have to get 3 of them together at the same time and they're all like in their natural environment, they're all lone hunters. That's maybe just isn't likely to happen. Or maybe it's about like, maybe it can be done sequentially. Like maybe gender 1 and gender 2 meet, they get it on. And then like gender 2 individual goes off and meets gender 3 individual and they do another deed. And then gender 3 is the one that actually lays the eggs.
Interesting.
That could be kind of interesting. I like the idea of it being kind of complicated, or at least to use the idea of 3. There's a species in an Ian M. Banks book called Player of Games, and I cannot remember the name of the species, but they have 3 genders, and it's the males, females, and the apices, which is like the apex has sex with the male to gather the sperm, and then they have the source of the egg, which they then implant in the females, and it leads to a whole bunch of really interesting knock-on effects in their society. So if you're interested in that concept, go read Play Art of Games. It's a good book.
It is kind of interesting to have sort of a rock, paper, scissors kind of effect to the genders or sexes.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool. It would lead to, like, rather than one dominant gender, you could have one can beat the other in one aspect or something, like surpasses one in one aspect, and then that one, and we can work on Pokemon logic or something where.
What's your gender? Fire type.
Oh, actually, that's a joke, but I kind of like it. Not specifically fire, but earth, air, and water as being the names of their genders.
Interesting.
Because those are the environments where each of them, maybe they have an advantage in those environments.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, where like the air gender has a greater capacity to breathe air and like survive longer without drying out and stuff like that. And so they're the ones that have to go up and actually lay the eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And then the water gender is the one with the best swimming capacity and like is the one that moves most quickly through the water. And so they're the sort of intermediate step between the other two genders. They're the ones who they meet one and then they meet the other because they're the strongest swimmers. And then you have the earth gender, which is they're the ones who like spend the most time deep in the like silt and like they actually dig hovels and stuff like that for themselves. They dig burrows underwater. That'd be really cool. And then where that idea is very alien to us, in the idea that like your gender like is about like an element. I love that, attaching that to a creature.
No, yeah, that's a really cool idea. Another kind of going with that sort of trilateral aspect is whereas our brains are divided into two halves. What if there were like 3/3 to a Hutt's brain? Like one side for logic, one side for emotion, and then one for some third aspect.
What's a good third aspect for that? Or you could divide it. You could divide it into 3 different sections where it's like, you know, they don't really distinguish between emotion and logic, but maybe it's more like, it's so ingrained into our way of thinking about thought that like I'm having a hard time thinking of a different example.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of them having a sort of 3-lobed brain, which I think definitely shouldn't be in their head. I think it needs to be something really weird, like it's in their like midsection or something like that, like it's deep in their core. Maybe it's not even a brain, but like an overly developed spinal cord situation, like it's a central nervous column or something like that. And so it's this big long snake-like thing that when they change shape and like contract in and out, it actually like kind of affects their brain a little bit because it's having to change shape at the same time.
Maybe they only have maybe they only have 3 senses, like audio, visual, and sense, or maybe they don't have taste and smell or something like that.
Yeah. Or maybe they don't distinguish between touch, taste, and smell. To them, those are a single sense. Much like you can feel something on your tongue without tasting it. And you can also and then to them, they might have those same receptors all over that like do the tasting, the sort of chemical receptors. They're just concentrated inside the mouth.
And I mean, if they're just swimming through muck, like constantly, taste probably isn't a huge factor for them.
Well, yeah, but also like scent, being able to track things underwater and find out where your prey is through it could be very useful. Maybe those big eyes aren't actually eyes. Maybe they look like eyes to us, but they're actually, maybe they use something else, like they're ultrasonic sonar sense organs, or maybe they're electromagnetic, like a platypus beak, or like sharks use this too. That could be cool. Or maybe they just have, maybe they don't have just 3 senses. Maybe they have a large number, like other creatures. Maybe it's 6 or something like that for them. So they can get to something divisible by 3. Then I guess that means they definitely are going to have a like 3 fingers on each hand, 3 ends to the hand, like a thumb and 2 fingers, or maybe they're just sort of tentacly, like they don't have bones in them. They're just kind of it just kind of comes out like a star shape, and that's what they use to grasp onto things. This doesn't have any basis for anything else we've been talking about, but I kind of love the idea they have a beak in their palm. Like it's not a mouth. it's just a beak. Like, it's just 3 little teeth that they can use to like take bites out of stuff and like grab on, and like that's their manipulative.
Gross.
It's like for opening cans and stuff nowadays. Like,
Mhm.
that'll make up for their lack of teeth in their mouth, I think. Yeah, these guys are gross. They should be gross.
That is kind of our brand.
Yeah. But I mean, like, moreover, just like when you see Jabba, he's supposed to be gross. Like that's like where that's his role in the story, is that he's this giant gross monster that has to get strangled to death.
Yeah. If you want to go kind of the gross route,
Oh, always.
grubs, how they have kind of like that like row of like dots down the side of.
Yeah.
Like I'm picturing something like that, but like trilaterally.
Oh yeah, perfect. Maybe we drop the eyes on stalks, and instead those dots are some sort of sense organs.
Okay, yeah.
Like they could be alternating between like an electromagnetic sense organ like a shark has, and then every other one is one of those, and the ones that aren't those are like primitive eyes. Instead of being like full binocular or trinocular vision for them, they're
basically just like little photoreceptors.
Yeah, basically photoreceptors, where they can get kind of like an idea of light or dark if there's something blocking light from that section. And they make up for the individual lack of clarity from each of them by just having a ton of them all down their body.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
And that also allows them to have more options for seeing when they're covered in slime and muck.
Exactly. And it gives them not a clear picture in all directions, but they have some vision in every direction around them. Like they can't be snuck up on, which is cool. I like that.
Very, very spider-like in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. And let's see, what else can we talk about? What else could Hutts have? What are the gross things?
What are the gross things?
I like the idea that there's an idiom, which is like, you can't sneak up on a hut.
Yeah.
Like that sounds good. Like that's something that people in the Star Wars universe could say. It's like, oh no, you can't sneak up on a hut. And they get a reputation for always looking around and seeing every angle and all that stuff. That'd be really cool. Because they're all about planning. As ambush predators, they're all about planning out a trap, and getting people into a situation where then the hut has all the power.
Yeah, I do like the idea that they're a big race. They're a big schemer.
Yeah.
As a race.
They're always about planning, and then like their sort of inclination is to set things up for one big move, right?
Mm-hmm. And I like that, like they're thought of as maybe a criminal empire, but really they're just a bunch of localized cells. But they're, because of their biology or their ecology or whatever, they're just very adept at adapting and taking control of whatever environment they're in.
Yeah, and that any individual hut, if they were to start working together, are only going to do that as long as they can, until one of them gets an opportunity to take the other one out and betray them and take over their organization and like absorb them, right? Like they never are really working together just altruistically because this is a good idea. They're only ever doing it as an opportunity to strike. Like they're always sharks in that regard.
So with these 3 genders, what if like a big part of like their commerce or trade was basically in negotiating for like breeding rights?
Okay.
With Hutts on other planets and whatnot. And because of like basically there being three branches of their gender or their sex, they have to sort of negotiate. And there's always like this worry that like, oh, these 2 genders will band together and it'll be real bad for this 3rd gender.
Yeah. They're kind of, they have like a moderate amount of cohesion with them, with the same members of their gender, because they think and act kind of alike, and so they sort of naturally want to kind of coalesce in that way. Yeah, that's cool, and it's like maintaining this delicate balance between the 3. That's cool. Yeah, I like that.
So there's like some sort of built-in system of checks and balances.
Yeah, that could be cool. I like the idea also of them having to like, they have the need to breed. Oh God, they have a need to breed. Anyway, they have the need to have sex with another member of their race, but they don't tend to live amongst members of their race. And so getting passage onto another world where there's a hut that you can have sex with is like a big deal, and it makes the traveling hut very vulnerable. And it requires all these like complex negotiations and assurances that they're not going to be like held for ransom or killed or something like that when they travel. That could be kind of cool.
Interesting. So what if the third gender is what's needed for fertility?
Okay.
To breed like gender A and gender B or air and water or whatever, at least one of those has to be fertile.
Yeah.
And to become fertile, they have to have sex with the third, like the earth gender or whatever.
Okay.
And so there's sort of like a system of barter there.
That's an interesting idea. I like the idea that becoming fertile requires mating with a particular of the other two genders. Maybe it's one of those things where each one of the genders maybe even has the gender that they have sex with in order to gain fertility, and then the second gender, which is the one they actually make babies with. So like the earth gender, when it wants to become fertile, has to go find an air gendered Hutt in order to have sex with them. But then they never have to have sex with an air gender ever again. They like do it once and it's like a rite of passage.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then they go off to make babies with the with the water gender or something like that. Whereas the water gender, I guess the math on that one kind of doesn't work out, because then you have to have, because there would be some of them that would be having sex to become fertile, but then the other opposite version of it would be having it for breeding purposes. Maybe that doesn't quite work. I think I'd have to end up diagramming this out on a piece of paper. But I like the idea of them having like a life stage that's marked by that kind of demarcation. That's pretty cool. And then after that, okay, wait. Sex isn't about maybe making babies. They don't actually have sex in order to make babies. They do the having sex in order to like enter into the next stage of life. And they each have like the earth the earth gender has to go find the water gender has to find the air has to find the earth. One of those three. It's all like recyclable. And then after that, they can just spew their gametes out into the water like a fish does. And then they can just like send those along. Like you could like, in their natural state, they're just like spraying them out like fish do. As they became more developed, instead they're like packaging them up and sending them along like through a carrier. And like, instead of going and having sex with another gender, they just like hand them a packet of gametes. They just like, here's some eggs, here's some sperm, do whatever you want with them. I'm gone.
The industrial sexual revolution.
And like, I think that kind of fits together with the idea of like, they view the creation of offspring as like just this biological need that they fulfill. Like, it's not particularly pleasurable to them. They feel like they need to do it. They have this stuff built up inside them and they need to expunge it and then they send it on.
I like that. Yeah.
In fact, maybe that's one of those bartering things where like maybe the egg producing gender or sex, like the eggs will swell up inside them unless they get the other gametes. And so they have to barter with the other Hutts in order to get the gametes they need in order to fertilize themselves. And then they can lay the eggs and like that keeps them from essentially exploding because they have too many eggs inside them.
A grisly end for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good way. That's a good, I was going to say it's a good moment. It's a terrible moment to have in a movie where like that happens all of a sudden. Super gross.
Yeah.
But then other than that, they're like free of the like mating romantic urges that other species have. They're pretty much just like, we're good. It's fine. Like I'm done. Yeah, and one way you could have it, we've been talking about them as like the sexes are innate. Like when you're born, you are the sex, the gender A, gender B, gender C. We've also probably been using gender and sex terms incorrectly here because we're talking about biological sexes and not necessarily cultural genders, and those can be different. And that's a whole mire that gets all the more complex when you get a third one in there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking is there's also lots of species for whom the progression of sex is based off of like social pressures and life stage. Like clownfish are like this famously, where like they're all female except for one male, which mates with all the females. And then if that male dies, one of the females gets bigger and becomes a male and then starts inseminating all the females. It's just like a life stage thing.
Huh.
So you I don't know if that fits into our version of Hutts, maybe, but you could, where like they have three sexes and, they start off as air gendered or air sexed. They move to water and then they become earth later on as they get big and slow, and like that, they produce different gametes at different stages of their life cycle.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
That'd be cool. It also would allow you, I mean, I really like our version of the way their bodies are put together, this big slug with 3 arms and a big old mouth at one end that just swallows things whole.
Mm-hmm.
If they're going through some sort of distinct life stages, you could give them like 3 different, maybe even drastically different body types.
Okay.
I think for ours, it would be something more like the small, like the air gendered one or something like that is small and like it's compared to the rest of its body, its arms are still quite big that allow it to move over land well. And it's got stronger arms to like move it through, like it can even climb a little bit, and it has more of its internal capacity devoted to the lungs so that it can survive better out on land, and it moves faster out on land.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets into the water and it becomes this as it moves into the next stage of its life, kind of like a frog moving into, or tadpole to frog stage. It like its body swells, or not swells, becomes longer, and it becomes like this long eel-like snake creature that moves through the swamps. And maybe that one isn't quite such an ambush predator. Maybe that one is more of a
hunter.
More of a hunter. Yeah. It becomes a hunter. Then as it gets later in life, it turns into that third sex, the earth sex, and that's when it becomes this big fat slug-like creature that like burrows down into the silt to wait in ambush for things.
Okay, yeah, that's a really cool life cycle.
Yeah, that's neat. In fact, in this if this was what a hut was, I would propose that the creature in the first Death Star's trash compactor should be a hut then, because that would be cool.
Oh yeah,
instead of whatever
I know the scene you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's one of them. They renamed this monster when they made it a D&D creature. So it's either an Odiug or a Dianoga, and I cannot remember which one is which.
The Dianoga is from Star Wars. The Odiug is from D&D.
Okay, yeah, so it's the Dianoga then, is the trash compactor beast. Okay, small tidbit from the old school levels of Star Wars canon is that, and this may not be the case with the Dianoga, but a ton of the minor characters in Star Wars were named by the trading card system that they created. Like,
interesting.
When only the original series had come out, and I don't even think they were probably doing extended universe books, but they weren't big or anything like that. Lucasfilm made trading cards for every single character that ever appears on screen in any of the 3 Star Wars movies. If you like, the guy running through Bespin with an ice cream maker probably has a card, and they handed all of these these frames from the movie. They had to have a little spiel on them about who this character was and a name. And they just handed all of these to some dudes and were like, here, name all these characters. And so every character that appears on screen in any of the 3 Star Wars movies has a name, and it was just some dude in a closet somewhere at Lucasfilm marketing being like, I guess that's a Dianoga. Okay, I guess this Jawa's name is Utini because one of them yells that. Okay, and then all of them have names, which I think is hilarious, and they're still quote unquote canon to this day because that was part of the levels of canon back in the day.
And there has probably been a book written about every one of them at this point.
I have to admit,
book or short story.
I had when I was 12, I think I got a book that was like Tales from Jabba's Palace, and it was a bunch of short stories about various characters in Jabba's palace and what was going on with their lives. And I devoured that back when I was a kid. That was so cool. The only one that I can kind of remember is there was a story about the Rancor Keeper, the guy who kept the Rancor. And it was this whole thing about how he was the beast keeper for Jabba, and he all he wanted in his life was a Rancor. He wanted one so bad. And eventually he got the go ahead to order one, and it showed up, and they used to go on little adventures out in the desert of Tatooine at night. And it was like a boy and his dog story. And then after I read,
and we all know how it ends.
and then I read the thing, and then you see that dude on screen crying in Return of the Jedi when the Rancor dies. And I remember being like 13 years old, being like, oh, that's really sad now. Like that was just his pet. Yeah. Okay. On that sad note, I think we're done. Bye.
Till next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Monster Mechanics. You can find links and show notes at our website, monsterpod.org. Or if you'd like to support us, head on over to patreon.com/monsterpod. We can be found on Twitter at MonsterMPod, or you can email us at monstermechanicspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by Scott Paladin. This episode was hosted by Scott Paladin and Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas produced during this podcast are released under a do what the fuck you want public license.